While the world's eyes are glued to the brutal war on Ukraine's front lines, there's a whole other war being fought in the shadows. It's a battle for light, for heat, and really for the soul of the nation. It's a fight over its energy grid and who gets to control what comes next. So let's break down what is really going on. It's a question that hangs over every single decision being made in Kiev right now. Because you see, while soldiers are out there fighting for every inch of territory, a parallel struggle is unfolding, a fight between survival and sovereignty, between rebuilding and, well, being taken over. And that struggle, it all starts with a crisis that is almost impossible to wrap your head around. By the winter of 2025, Ukraine's energy grid wasn't just struggling, it was being pushed to the absolute brink of a total collapse. 90%. That's the number that says it all. By early 2026, after relentless Russian strikes, a staggering 90% of Ukraine's thermal power generation had been systematically wiped out. This wasn't just random damage. This was a strategic obliteration of the country's ability to power itself. This table really puts the sheer scale of the devastation into perspective. I mean, just look at these numbers. The total available power capacity was more than cut in half. Those thermal plants that provide the steady, reliable power, almost entirely gone. And even the hydropower stations, which are so critical for balancing the grid, were crippled. The country was literally being plunged into darkness. And this is the human cost. This wasn't just an infrastructure problem, not at all. It was a humanitarian catastrophe. We're talking about 12-hour blackouts in the dead of winter. For millions of people, that meant life itself was on the line. Okay, so in the face of this near-total collapse, a massive two-pronged solution started to come together. It was a plan to save the grid that brought together Ukrainian leadership on the ground and some of the biggest names in international finance. So, on the ground in Ukraine, the strategy was all about survival through adaptation. Instead of trying to rebuild these giant, vulnerable targets, Energy Minister Denis Shmyhal pushed for something called tactical decentralization, hundreds of smaller, distributed power sources, like gas turbines and solar arrays. The whole goal was to create a grid that was just much, much harder to kill. But here's the thing. Decentralization costs a ton of money. Money that Ukraine simply did not have. And that's where the international firepower comes in. Enter the Ukraine Development Fund, or UDF. It's a fund advised by BlackRock, the world's largest asset manager, and it was created specifically to channel massive amounts of private money into the reconstruction effort. And the scale of this plan is just immense. We're talking $800 billion. But if you look at the priorities here, you can see this was never just about putting back what was destroyed. No, this was about fundamentally transforming Ukraine's entire economy, with a huge focus on its massive mineral wealth, its agriculture, and a major pivot to green energy. And this is where our story gets really complicated. As soon as all this money started being discussed, a fierce debate erupted. Was this a rescue mission for Ukraine, or was it something else entirely? So you basically have two completely opposing views. On one side, the official rationale is pretty straightforward. Ukraine is broke, and private investment is the only way to rebuild quickly. Plus, it gives Western companies a real stake in Ukraine's survival. But the critique is just as powerful, that this is classic disaster capitalism, using a crisis to force a country to sell off its most valuable assets, effectively trading political sovereignty for economic survival. So why all the intense interest from investors? Well, this number explains a lot. $12 trillion. That is the estimated value of Ukraine's reserves of critical minerals. Things like lithium and uranium, which are absolutely essential for the global green energy transition. The stakes here go way, way beyond just rebuilding a few power plants. But while this whole debate over foreign influence was raging, something else was happening. Something that threatened to rot the entire reconstruction effort from the inside out. A scandal that would reach the very highest levels of power in Kyiv. Let's be honest, Ukraine's energy sector has long been a hotbed for corruption. The Burisma scandal made that clear to the whole world. But in November of 2025, right as these reconstruction plans were getting serious, NABU, that's the country's independent anti-corruption agency, dropped an absolute bombshell. This quote from NABU really gets to the heart of it. They found that a shadow group, people with no official power whatsoever, was effectively running Energoatom. That's the state company that controls all of Ukraine's nuclear power plants, the very backbone of its crippled grid. And this group was allegedly forcing contractors to pay huge kickbacks, siphoning off at least $100 million. And this is what made the scandal so explosive. The names that were being leaked weren't just random officials. They allegedly included some of President Zelensky's closest friends and allies, his former business partner, Timur Mindich, and multiple current and former cabinet ministers. The rot appeared to go right to the very top. To make matters even worse, at the very same time this was all coming out, the government was prosecuting Volodymyr Kudrytsky. Now, he was the internationally respected head of the grid operator who had pulled off the miracle of connecting Ukraine to the European system. To his critics, it looked like a classic political move, go after a popular reformer as a scapegoat to distract from the massive corruption scandal engulfing the president's inner circle. So yeah, it's a deeply troubling picture. But this isn't just a story about corruption. It's also the story of a nation fighting back, not just against an enemy at its borders, but for its own democratic future. I think this quote from the lead NABU investigator is so powerful because it reframes the whole issue. He argues that the real story here isn't the scandal itself, but the fact that an independent institution like NABU had the power and, frankly, the courage to expose it, even when it led right to the president's doorstep.
And this is the crucial point. It's not just the institutions fighting back. When the government tried to push through a law that would have crippled these anti-corruption agencies, Ukrainian citizens actually took to the streets. These were the first mass protests since the invasion began. And you know what? They won. They forced the president to back down.
Which brings us right back to that central question. Ukraine is caught in this impossible bind. It desperately needs foreign money to survive the winter and win the war. But that money comes with the risk of losing control of its own economy. And at the same time, it has to fight the cancer of internal corruption, even if it means exposing deep flaws at the highest levels of a government, trying to project this image of perfect unity. There are no easy answers here, only a profound and ongoing struggle for the future.